I'm not a big fan of budgeting. I think most popular budgeting techniques don't work. Maybe I'm wrong. Maureen is here. Let's begin.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
It is the month of November, which is Financial Literacy Month in Canada. And those of you who have been watching this channel for the last 10 years will know that every November we do stuff about Financial Literacy Month. And every year I say that it's basically a waste of time. I don't know why we bother. It's a government thing and everybody jumps on it. All the financial podcasts jump on it. And of course, all the banks and everything, they have financial literacy stuff, to teach you how to get into more debt and stuff like that. So I'm not a big fan of it. However, I'm not a big fan of Financial Literacy Month. I am a big fan of financial literacy. I think the more you know about money, the better. So today, Maureen is back and we're going to answer the question, why is it that most popular budgeting techniques don't work? And again, everybody knows I'm not a big fan of budgeting. And the reason for that is I believe that you're just not going to do it. I'm also not a big fan of calorie counting or dieting. I mean, it's a great in theory, but are you actually going to do it? Probably not. So I'm more of a systems guy, figure out ways to accomplish what you need without trying to record every single transaction. Maureen, of course, has a slightly different viewpoint on pretty much everything than I do, which is why she's here. So, Maureen, you are coming to us from Canada today, I believe?
Yes, that's correct.
So Maureen is our trustee in Ottawa and Canada, and so we're gonna bounce back and forth with talking about some of these budgeting related issues. So I just said that I'm not a big fan of budgeting. So let's start there since it's my podcast and I get to start wherever I want.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Why is it that budgeting in general and specific techniques don't work? Give me some, just, throw out an idea or two. And we have a list here of like 97 different things to talk about. We're not going to get to all of them today, but why is it that budgeting or specific budgeting techniques don't work? Just throw a couple of ideas out and we'll discuss them.
Well, okay. So generally when budgeting isn't working is you've picked a style that doesn't work for you. You have a regular income. Maybe you haven't put in the fun categories. You've missed something unexpected comes up and you weren't prepared for it.
Well, you hit on a couple of obvious ones right there. Irregular income. So, particularly in Toronto, I see this a lot. I don't know what you see. I mean, you're more in a government high-tech town, but in Toronto, I deal with a lot of artists, actors, people in the creative industries. So they end up working on a gig for 3 months and then they don't have anything for 3 months. Right. People in construction, really busy in the summer, not so busy in the winter. Kind of hard to budget every month when your income bounces around. That's what you're talking about there. And I agree, and I've got some ideas how to counterbalance that. Now, the other thing you mentioned was unexpected expenses. Again, same deal, right? How do I put in my budget things that I don't know are going to happen? So give me some examples of what you're talking about with unexpected expenses.
So things like, the common ones, something happens to your car and you need to get it fixed. Something happens to the pet. You need to have them brought to the vet. Those are unexpected expenses. You kind of expect them, but you don't expect when they're going to happen. Or, a tree lands on your roof, right? And then you're either, or there's a flood and you can't stay in your rental apartment, so you have to move out. Like there's lots of different things that just randomly happen that you aren't expecting. Very interesting examples, because two of those three things have happened to me in the last 3 days. We had the tree guy doing a bunch of stuff. And we'll talk about this offline, but my wife's car, all the interior lights were flashing, which is not a good sign. So apparently if you fry your electrical system by leaving the car in the garage, that's a bad thing. So we'll find out. All of those things you can project to happen at some point in the future. But your point is, I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know when I'm going to get a flat tire. Right. So that's what makes it kind of hard, because you get these things thrown at you. We'll talk about that as well. Is there
So let's talk, because I think you alluded to this as well. One of the other issues is the wrong budgeting approach. So we're going to talk about the different approaches. Explain to me what you mean by the wrong budgeting approach.
Well, everyone has their own personality style. Are you super focused on budgeting? Are you detail oriented? Are you a fly by your seat of the pants? What's your style? Are you a super busy parent and you just kind of don't have the time to be detailed? So there's lots of factors. Are you self-employed? So not every budget will suit every life.
So you got to pick what works for you. Okay, so let's go through a few of the different types of budgeting techniques, and you'll explain them and I'll trash them. That's how this is going to work.
That sounds good.
So the first one you've got on your list here is you've called it pay yourself first, and you've also called it 80-20. So those seem like two different things to me, but explain to me what you mean by pay yourself first.
Well, with the pay yourself first, your focus is making sure you have savings. So you're paying yourself to make sure you have an emergency savings and you want some sort of retirement focus. So that's your focus. And then the rest of the money, so 20%, you're like, okay, this is what I'm going to do for the emergency savings and other savings, and 80%, I'm going to live off that.
Yeah, and that's very common, old school technique, which I guess, that probably it's a good idea. It's the, what is it called? The Lundy effect or whatever. If it's been around for 100 years, it's probably stood the test of time. Right. My late great father-in-law was on this podcast a number of years ago, and that was his approach. It's, 10% of your every paycheck is yours to keep was kind of his mantra, that when I get my paycheck, I tuck whatever the percentage is, 10% of it away. That goes into my savings, my RSP, my TFSA, whatever. And then the rest of it is what I spend. Right. That's great in theory, except if I'm living paycheck to paycheck already, then kind of hard. I make $3,000 a month. It costs me $3,000 a month to live, not a whole lot for savings. But I guess if you're able to squeeze a couple of bucks out, then that's an excellent way to do it. How does 80-20 come into that then?
Oh, that was just a number. So the 20 is for paying yourself first, plus maybe any debt payments. So it's just a number that you pick. So you can switch the number up how you wish. You can do 10 and 90. That's up to you, but that's how that comes in. So, but the concept is to make sure you get your savings in place. This budget doesn't work though if you haven't properly looked at your life expenditures. So if you think you can take 20% and you put it aside, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, wait a minute, I forgot about the birthday that's coming up. I got to do a birthday party. And then you're taking money out. That doesn't work, right? Or you didn't put money aside for the oil change. So you really need to, in the 80-20 budget, you have to, one, be really good at putting savings away and not touching them. And you also have to really have a good handle on what expenditures you actually have.
And that's where we get into things like, okay, instead of 80-20, I could do it 50-30-20 or 40-30-20-10 or 75-10.
That's another style of budget.
Which is another style of budget. And so explain what's the difference then. So if I want to do the 50-30-20, what are you talking about there?
That's like needs, wants, and savings.
So I'm really splitting
50% for your needs, 30% for your wants, and 20% for savings and debt payment.
Gotcha. So I'm taking the 80-20 and really making it 50-30 and 20. Right. And that helps by making it a little more clear what each section is going for. Like what's the advantage of that?
Right. The 80-20 is very loosey-goosey. You got 80%, do what you will. Right. The 50-30-20 makes it a little bit more crystallized in the categories. Oh, 50% is for my needs, my housing, utilities, transportation. The 30% for wants. I want to travel. I want to go out. 20% for savings. And but you really need to understand wants versus needs.
So where would a tattoo go in that? Is that a want? Is that a need?
That's a want.
It's a want. Okay. I'm just clarifying here for the people watching on YouTube. And then I guess you can refine it even further and say, well, okay, let's make it 40, 30, 20, 10 or something like that. And really all you're doing is just refining it further is what that involves.
Right. And sometimes, unfortunately, right now with the cost of living, 50, 30, 20 isn't realistic. We did a whole podcast on that. Like, it's just not going to happen. The cost of living is so high. So there it might be 75, 15, 10. So this budget, although it allows for a bit of loosey-goosey and it has some parameters, which can be nice. But if there's a high cost of living, if you have debt, this isn't really gonna work well.
Yeah,
right?
And I think we're kind of beating around the bush here, which is, okay, this sounds very esoteric. Do I want to do 80-20 or 50-30-20 or 20? I think forget about all that. What you got to do at the start is figure out where you're at now. So before you come up with any kind of crazy system that a couple of people on a podcast are talking about, I think the first step is, where am I at now? And in the old days, I guess I would carry a piece of paper with me, and I would write down everything. Of course, we don't use paper anymore. Everything's electronic. My advice to people, and you can tell me if this is what you advise as well, is you're paying for everything either with your debit card or your credit card. So go into the banking app and download your transactions for the last 2 or 3 months and take a look at them. That will tell you how much you are spending on, every different category. And when you see it in front of you, it's kind of like a shock, like, holy crap, I didn't know I spent that much. Yeah. And from there, you can then decide what kind of ratios make sense. Okay, here's how much I've been spending at the grocery store. Maybe I can carve a little bit out of that. Maybe I can't. Isn't that the starting point of any budgeting adventure, to figure out where you're at?
Absolutely. You have to figure out where you're at and do the analysis. But if you are only looking at the past 2 or 3 months, then you're maybe not capturing the oil change that you're going to do, or the tire change, or a birthday. So there are still things that, even if you're analyzing the 2-3 months, you still want to think, okay, what's coming up? What do I have? What possessions do I own that will require regular maintenance? Has that been accounted for? What am I doing? What family celebrations are coming up? So you do always want to go beyond the 2-3 months and think about what's coming up for the year.
Yeah, it's a good point.
So that you capture everything.
And I guess there's 2 ways to do that. One way is, download the transactions for the last year then. Right. And some of them will be repetitive because you go to the same grocery store every week. The other way to do that is to pull out a calendar. And usually at this time of year in November and December, I don't know, all the real estate guys are sending me calendars. So I got like 50 paper calendars. They all go in the recycling. But you can look at the calendar and go, okay, I'm going to circle the, there you go. You got the Hoyes Michaelis calendar too. That's perfect.
I love the Hoyes Michaelis calendar.
They're wonderful. We should be selling those, and it'd be a great money maker for us. So what you can do is look at the calendar and go, okay, let me circle all the birthdays. When is summer vacation? When is March break? When is Christmas? I can tell everyone Christmas is December 25th. So you can circle that right now.
You're going to scramble anyways, just so you know.
I know. And that's always the way it is. But if you can see it, the nice thing about the calendar is things like your kid's birthday is the same day every year. Christmas is the same day every year. But there are things that don't necessarily intuitively go on a calendar. So if you pay your car insurance annually, I don't know if anyone still does that or not, but okay, when does that happen? It used to be you had to pay to renew your license. I think your buddy Doug Ford has made that free at the moment, or your license sticker or whatever. But there are things like that. Now people are going, "Oh, she's buddies with Doug Ford. Well, we're not listening to this podcast anymore." It's a joke, people. It's a joke. It's a joke. Just because the guy's name is Doug doesn't mean he's smart, as this podcast has also proven. So I think you got to do both, right? You got to look at your history of transactions. You got to look at your calendar, make sure you're not missing anything. And so when I look at that and I go, oh, I've got this annual expenditure because we go on a summer vacation every year and we go up camping and it costs us however much it costs. what do I do with that information? So it's going to cost $1,000 to go, I don't know, up and visit grandma for a week, or the plane ticket, or the camping, or the Disney World, or whatever. Pretty sure Disney World would cost more than $1,000. But what do I do with that information then? If I'm doing one of these kind of budgeting techniques?
Well, when you are looking at upcoming costs that you want to spend, you have to look and make sure that you actually have the money to do so. And you're either planning on your paydays to chunk, like take when you want to go, how many months away? Is it 12 months away, right? Or 10 months away? Okay, I have to save $100 a month for the next 10 months, right? Let me take $50 off of each paycheck. I understand 1 month has 3 pays. And then I'll be good to go by that time. If you can't afford to do so, then you might have to adjust when you're going to go, or reduce another expense, or do a part-time job, something to allow for that. Or if you, can use on the third paycheck, if you're paid biweekly, half of that money is typically unaccounted for money. And you can use some of that to go towards that expenditure.
So you got to plan it in advance. That makes sense to me. So let's go really old school here, because another budgeting technique is the envelope budget. And I think this is something that, Gail Vaz Oxlade, when she was doing her TV shows, I think she called it the jar method, but it's the same concept.
Right.
And, as I understand it, I've got an envelope or a jar or a folder or whatever marked for each of my big expenses. I got groceries, I got gas for the car, whatever. And every payday, I take the cash and shove it into the appropriate envelope. And that way I know, okay, this is my grocery envelope. When I go to the grocery store, I can't spend anything more than that. So that makes perfect sense to see where your money goes, because you can quite literally see where your money goes. It's in the jar. It's in the envelope. But I can see a lot of downsides to that. So why don't you be the negative person on this one and tell me how does that go wrong?
Right. Well, it can go wrong. Initially, if you see a lot of money in your envelope, you might feel really flush with cash, and then you might do a bit of too much early spending, and then you're eking it out near the end. It can get lost. It can get stolen. The temptation to dip into, that envelope, I'm going to dip in and put it into this envelope and then go. So then it can spiral out of control fairly quickly if you're not very respectful of the envelope system. And
particularly if you're someone who maybe you're on a pension, or you work for like that big university where you only get paid once a month, there's a lot of money in the envelope at the start of the month. I can see how it's like, I got lots of money. I'm going to, buy a lot of extra stuff. To me, the biggest problem with that is what you already said, is like, I don't want to have cash lying around my house. Like that's crazy. Someone's going to steal it. I'm going to lose it. My house is going to burn down. You could do that electronically, I assume, by having either a spreadsheet where you keep track of what everything is, or a piece of paper or whatever, or if you're using one of the online banks that don't have any fees, I guess you could set up 5 different bank accounts and put your food money in one and your transportation in the other, or so on.
And most savings, even at the big banks, don't have a charge.
That's true.
From them.
Whether you can, they probably discourage you from having 12 different accounts, but I guess there's no reason you couldn't do that. So okay, there's some good and bad about those techniques. Now, another one, go ahead.
The other thing with the envelope system, it's not very helpful for things that have to come out automatically from your account, like insurance or rent payments. So it's really just for the minor stuff, like the eating out, the groceries and that kind of stuff, not for rent, not for insurance.
That's a good point. And I mean, everybody I know pays their rent electronically. Either it comes out at the start of the month, or I send an e-transfer to the landlord at the start of the month.
That's right. And checks are too expensive.
Well, yeah. And how do I get the check to the landlord? Whereas I send them an e-transfer, I know they've got it. They know they've got it. Boom, we're done. So You're right. It becomes a budgeting system that was great 20 years ago when everything was paper and checks and cash, but now that we're all electronic, not so good. Now there's another concept that works in the business world, but has kind of morphed into the personal world as well, and that is zero-based budgeting. What is zero-based budgeting?
Well, that's where you assign a purpose to every dollar that you have.
So what are we talking, like all this mindfulness stuff now and everything? This stuff.
Yes, I know we have to get into mindfulness.
Lord.
I love it.
Okay. And again, I guess it all depends on the words. You call it mindfulness. I call it, well, you got to figure out where your money's going. So really we're talking about the same thing.
Exactly.
So
just be aware.
How does that work in practice then? If I want to be a zero-based budgeter, then where do I start?
Well,
what do I do?
And this person needs to like to have control and structure. Right? They have to be detail oriented, because if you're not that person, then the zero-based budgeting isn't going to work as well for you. So, but basically you're like, if I have $2,000, you know where exactly every penny is going. I've done budgets at work with people and they're like, well, there's $10 left over. Do we have to assign it to? I go, yes. I have zero-based budgeting, even that $10, you got to put it somewhere. You have to have a value for every dollar.
That sounds like hell. And I'm an accountant, okay? I mean, I'm a chartered accountant, a CPA. I mean, I'm a numbers guy. I love spreadsheets, the whole bit. But even I go crazy thinking about that, which is why my favorite method is no budgeting. Don't budget. Don't do it. And which is the exact opposite of what zero-based budgeting is. It's the complete antithesis. And my approach is, okay, if I have a salary, meaning my paycheck is relatively consistent, or frankly, even if it isn't, the system is still basically the same. I say, okay, I get paid every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks, I'm going to go into the magic computer on the www, and I'm going to send money to each of the people I owe money to. So on my cell phone bill's $100 a month. So every payday, twice a month, I send $50 to them. And I don't even have to think about it. I do that all up front. And, for my groceries, well, I go and, every payday I go and buy all my groceries, I guess. I mean, the money's just gone. It's a little trickier with rent because I probably can't send my landlord half the rent every month. But okay, I set up a separate bank account just for the rent. Every payday I put half the money in there. And then on payday, I put an alert on my phone. Don't forget to e-transfer the money. It's already sitting there. So to me, it takes a little bit of thinking up front, but then you set it and forget it and it's easy. So that to me is like the correct option and is brilliant. Tell me why I'm wrong.
Yay! Well, if you haven't really looked at your expenses, this isn't going to work well, right? Because there is a lot of freedom with the no budget as well. You set some things up, but then the rest you're just spending. So, and if you have difficulty saying no to yourself or saying, I can't afford that, I don't have money for that right now, then this budget also won't help, because then you might find yourself short.
Yeah, but I disagree, because
okay, let's go.
In this system, so let's think about this. So it's payday, right. Okay?
Yeah.
So my paycheck comes in and automatically that day, the money goes to the cell phone company, my hydro, my internet, my boom, 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 boom. And then money goes into my special account for rent and my special account for food. So at the end of the day, there's virtually nothing left in my account. I mean, if I've got the ability to put some money in savings, again, it's automatically gone. So I look at my bank account at the end of payday and there's $200 in it, and that's it, because everything else has already gone out. How can you get into trouble if you got no money? See, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. I'm telling you, it's brilliant.
Because what happens if, at least you mentioned savings. So you have to make sure that you do have money for savings. And you mentioned food and rent. Hopefully you also put money aside for clothing, and those kind of operational expenses as well, because oftentimes people don't think about spending on those periodic expenses until they're doing it. And then you have $200 to the end of the month and you want to, it's fall. You want to go to the pumpkin patch and you're like, okay, I'll buy a couple of pumpkins for $10 or whatever. And all of a sudden $100 later, because of the entrance fee, the hay bale ride, or, in the food and whatever it is that you end up doing. Now, all of a sudden you have $100 left over for the rest of the month. Then what happens? If you want to have pizza one night just because, everyone's going to hockey or they're doing whatever, and you just don't have time to cook and you need food. And all of a sudden you really don't have any extra money for the rest of the month.
Well,
you know what I mean? Like it's so easy to kind of go, oh, I have money to do this. And then you don't. All of a sudden you don't. Where are you going to get anything else from?
Yeah, and those points all make sense, but those are criticisms of every budgeting method, because in every budgeting method, I think the answer is, and this is kind of how we can wrap up the show before you give us some practical tips, is you got to have a plan. You got to actually think about it in advance. So I agree with you. My system where I pay half my cell phone bill every payday only makes sense if I look at how much my cell phone bill is and understand it, and then I come up with the right amounts, and then I actually look at my bill when it comes in every month to make sure I'm paying the right amount. And I have to actually think in advance that I have to carve out a bit of money for things that are going to pop up. So, going to the pumpkin patch, which I guess in November, you can get really cheap pumpkins now if you want to make all your pumpkins pie. And then because people are going to think, wait a minute, this isn't a live show. We're not, you're not recording this the first Saturday in November. No, we've actually recorded it a week earlier. But the point is you have to think all these things through, no matter what kind of budgeting you're doing, and set them aside.
And what happens and this was happening to me because I was doing the, on my payday, half to bell, right? And so sometimes Belle's like, oh, randomly I've increased this because we forgot to tell you blah, blah, blah. So, or this expenditure is a wee bit higher because your son went over and whatever. So then I'm like, okay, I thought it was paid. Now I have to pay an extra $10 just to make I'm on track. So I actually went back to my way of the detailed. I do the detailed on my payday. I sit down with my little book and I go through, and I find more stability in knowing exactly when it's done, that I've done it, and that it's not just done automatically.
Yeah,
so,
and I guess, and I guess that's a something you've got to figure out how to do it for yourself, I think, as to what the correct answer is. Yeah. And there is no correct answer, I guess, is kind of the point.
That is correct.
So, okay. So let's close the show then with whatever, 2 or 3 tips you've got for us in the last 2 or 3 minutes here.
Just 2 or 3?
Well, okay, I'll give you 5. I mean, my tip is what I just said. You got whatever it is you're doing, you got to have a plan. So if you are doing it the way I'm describing it, then you need to have a plan. You got to actually look at your cell phone bill to see how much it is, and then you got to look at it each month to make sure you're sending the correct amount. Now, under my system, if it's $100 a month and I get paid biweekly and I'm sending them $50 every 2 weeks, I'm going to overpay them. So by the time we get to the end of the year, there will be more money sitting there than what was needed. So which
can be great because Christmas is at the end of the year. So then you're like, I've already paid that. Let me pause that payment for this month and put it towards Christmas.
Exactly right. Happens. Yeah. So I think that's where that ends up helping out. So, okay. So what other tips do you have then? Just, I'll give you whatever you can say whatever you want on whatever subject. What other tips do you have for the people?
Okay. Well, embrace needing to adjust from time to time. Like, I think that's important. Like, just because this budget is working now doesn't mean in 2 years from now, maybe you need to adjust the style of budget. Maybe you're self-employed. So that's a different style of budgeting than when you're employed. So you need to, and even within a budget system, there still has to be tweaks. So you need to be able to embrace that there's adjustments. And when you start a budgeting process, trust it. Like, spend some time with it. Don't just go, oh, it's been 2 months and it's not working. If it's absolutely not working, be willing to shift it. But if it's just a little bit irritating or not quite right, just keep going with it. Trust it. Give it at least a good 6 months before you do anything. I think it's important to celebrate wins, even the little wins. And it doesn't have to be a monetary celebration. It can, of course, everything ends up even money. I'm like, even if you buy yourself a chocolate bar, you're still buying something. But regardless, you want to give yourself some sort of reward, verbal, otherwise. Celebrate your small wins. That's very important. It keeps you going.
Keeps the momentum going.
And another one with budgeting is remember why. Why did you want to start budgeting in the first place? It's usually because you wanted to have money for something in the future. So really remember why you're doing this, because it helps you through those times where you stagger a bit. Or when you get off track, have forgiveness, grace, and just get back on track.
Yeah, and that applies in pretty much every area in life too. I'm trying to go to the gym 5 days a week. Well, I only went twice this week. Well, move on.
Well, you went twice this week. Well done.
So celebrate the wins and don't worry so much, because it's never going to be perfect. I agree with you. You constantly need to be doing the course corrections. You're never going to get it perfectly right. You don't have a crystal ball. So you got to be very careful. So okay.
An 8-ball though.
Yeah, I agree. So those are all excellent tips, and I think the point of this show is you're the boss. Do it your way. Like, okay, obviously I have a completely different viewpoint on this than Maureen does. Okay, well, you probably have whoever's watching probably has a different viewpoint as well. So for those who are watching this on YouTube or whatever other platform you're on, there's a comment section there. Tell me why I'm right. Tell me why I'm wrong. Why you all agree with Maureen, which is probably what you're all going to say.
Or how you blend the systems.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes blending two systems to make it work for you is awesome. And so any tips or tricks would be helpful in the comments.
Right. And I think that's why chatting with your friends and family and coworkers about this is a good idea, because they'll probably have a tip that you hadn't thought of. So use your support network and make it work for you. So,
and sorry, I'm so sorry. Self-employed people, I would love to hear from the self-employed, because I know that's a very specific style of budgeting, which we don't often get into, but maybe we'll do a podcast on that one too.
Yep, and they have definitely irregular income in a lot of cases, which makes it that's much more difficult. So, so there you go. If you're self-employed, give us your tips. So, Maureen, thank you very much for being here to start off Financial Literacy Month. Next week, Ted will return, and we're going to consider the Financial Literacy Month theme, and we're going to discuss what does it mean to be financially fit. And I'm going to start the show by saying, who cares? Does it really matter? Why are we talking about this? And Ted and I will bounce that one back and forth. So that'll be next week here on Debt Free in 30. If you like watching social media stories, and those are the ones that last 24 hours, make sure you're following our Facebook and or our Instagram pages at Hoyes Michaelis, HoyesMichaelos. We share relevant news, budgeting infographics, and easy links to our resources. Obviously, please like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube or on the audio version, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever. We are on all podcasting apps. So please like and subscribe, leave a comment. To conclude, thanks for listening. Until next week when Ted and I will be discussing being financially fit. Thanks to Maureen. I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.